How do you find purpose when your revolution doesn't happen?
Because this is an unrepentant domestic terrorist who had campaigned to blow up, to destroy our Pentagon and our U.S. Capitol.
What's it like to be the most hated man in America?
Radical Chicago teacher Bill Ayers is Barack Obama's worst nightmare. Here's a guy who simply won't go away, a man most Americans detest.
How do you keep fighting for those hopeless causes?
We still have to hold on to the idea that we're organizers, that we believe in life, that we're a life force, not a death force.
This week, Bill Ayers on 9 Questions with Eric Oliver.
Hi, this is Eric Oliver. This week I'll be talking to Bill Ayers. Now, if you've heard of Bill, it's probably because of his involvement with the Weather Underground. Now, the Weather Underground was a group of radical revolutionaries who planted bombs at government buildings and military bases in opposition to the Vietnam War. They saw themselves as the spark of a great social revolution that was going to come from this. But following the destruction of one of their safe houses in New York, the organization kind of splintered and fell apart, and Bill and his partner Bernardine Dorn spent most of the 1970s on the run from the FBI. But in 1980, Bill turned himself in, and he ended up facing no formal charges because the FBI, it turns out, had engaged in all kinds of illegal tactics to try and capture him. Bill went on to get a PhD in education and spent the rest of his career as a teacher, author, and political activist. Now, he might have faded into obscurity if it weren't for the 2008 presidential campaign of Barack Obama. It turns out that Bill, who was a neighbor of Obama's down here in Hyde Park, had hosted a fundraiser a few years earlier for Obama when he was running for state senate. Now, when the Clinton campaign first discovered this, Bill was once again thrust into the national spotlight, and he stayed there thanks to the relentless efforts of the McCain campaign and Fox News. It was this whole idea that Obama was friends with terrorists. Now, I got to know Bill a few years ago as a neighbor. He lives down the street from me, and I would see him when I was walking my dog. Rather than being this menace to society, I saw this charming, lively, and really kind person who, even in his 70s, was really committed to his political ideals. I thought he would be a fantastic person to ask my 9 questions on how to know yourself, and he is. And if you want to hear more from Bill, I suggest you check out his own podcast called Under the Tree with Bill Ayers.
What you're about to hear is the edited version of Eric's 4-hour conversation with Bill. If you want to hear more about Bill's time in the Weather Underground, his time as a fugitive from the FBI, or his time as a target of right-wing media attention during the 2008 presidential election, head to 9-questions.com, where you'll find a link to our Patreon page, where we are happy to make the full version of all of our podcasts available to our Patreon supporters.
Here we are with the 9 questions. Why don't we start with the first one? Bill, what are you?
Yeah, I go back to think of myself as a teacher. I always, that's not what am I, that's kind of who am I. But I often characterize my students, whether they're 5-year-olds or 3-year-olds or 33-year-olds, as unruly sparks of meaning-making energy. So what am I? I'm a human being. What does it mean to be a human being? It means on a journey of discovery and surprise, and always moving, always a spark.
Aren't we all, sparks
we all are. We all are. And not only that, we're also part of everything. I mean, you go back far enough, and we all got the same molecules and the same life force. So yeah, what am I? A person who wants to be seen as a full human being, and wants to see myself that way. Mm-hmm. That is a person of many dimensions, a heart, a mind, a spirit, a soul, a body, all of which are kind of moving in tandem.
How do you describe your soul?
I think your soul is kind of your essence, in the sense that I've done work that's soul crushing.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Then I think, well, what's it crushing?
Yeah.
What part is it crushing? It's crushing who I aspire to be, who I think I am at the center of my existence. So in that sense, your soul is the center. I'm humble enough about my own life to think that I'm a speck of life, and a tiny speck, and a transient speck, and therefore there's so many things I don't know. So I think I'm agnostic and skeptical on almost every dimension about everything. And one of the reasons I intentionally don't embrace God or a God is because I think that narrows your ability to be, fully in the world. You kind of pass it off to the big guy, and that's a mistake in my view.
I've been grappling with this. There's a sense that there's something more to my essence than just my mind, my body. And that I think I've come up with, for me, which is a way of reconciling this, which is this idea that, I'm fundamentally an energy system, and that's at my most base level. But energy is at some level ineffable. It's not really, my mind can't comprehend energy. And it's in that space between what I know that I am and what I can understand. And that's kind of where my soul resides.
That's a wonderful way to put it. And I think we're on the same wavelength, because I've described students, I've argued with my students who are becoming teachers that they should look at their students not through a lens of categories, not categorically, black, white, boy, girl, AD, BD, EMH. Don't use those categories. Instead, see every student that comes through your door as a three-dimensional creature, just like yourself, with a heart, a mind, a spirit, a soul, a body. Yeah. And not to see them categorically, and not to wash them with a big broad brush, but to see them as each making their way, So I think that's a hopeful and interesting way to put it. But think of how we use the word soul. Soul crushing is one that I said. But then the other thing that comes to mind is you've got soul.
Yeah.
And let's listen to some soul music. Yeah. What's soul music? And why is it soul music? And I think the answer is that it's about feeling, it's about depth, it's about something that's ineffable.
I want to keep going on because I think this actually transitions nicely into the next question, which I think you've already answered to some extent, but I want to go into it, which is, what is your purpose?
I've often thought, again, I refer back again and again to myself as a teacher and a teacher educator, because I argue these things with my own students a lot. I ask them to consider and reflect on what their purpose is. Why are you going to be a teacher? What's the point? And, often when I'm teaching teachers, I'll say, did anybody encourage you not to be a teacher? And you know what? 99% of my students were told not to teach by their parents, their siblings, their boyfriend, their girlfriend, their cousin, and other teachers. Because teaching is a thankless job, they say. But to me, it's the most hopeful job and the most hopeful career, because you're ushering so many other callings. It's the calling of callings.
Do you think teaching gets a bad rap because people have had bad teachers?
No, I think teaching gets a bad rap because the system in which teaching exists. I mean, I think that teachers are poorly paid, poorly respected, too many kids, too little time, too few resources. That's the nature of public education. And, what's my purpose? My purpose is to live, right? And when I'm teaching teachers, I often ask them to do an exercise, like to go to a playground and watch a 2-year-old. You want to know what the meaning of life is? Watch that 2-year-old.
Is it to make meaning?
Well, it is. I mean, making meaning is the essence of what you're doing all the time. Uh-huh. And the problem is that meaning can be made in all directions, and it can, even your imagination can go in all directions. How do we imagine a world that's more fit for human beings and for all beings? That's part of the challenge to me. But I think my purpose is to be a teacher. And what is a teacher? A teacher is a perpetual learner. A teacher is somebody who's trying to learn all the time and wake up all the time.
I was listening to this speech recently by David Foster Wallace that he gave before he died. He was talking about the value of education. And he in his very interesting, elliptical, kind of edgy way, basically said, what an education is about is giving you power over yourself to resist your own worst antisocial or problematic impulses. And it's at the base, it's empowering you to be less of an asshole.
Yeah. I think that makes sense. And I think that what education, I've often thought that education introduces people to a world, and that world is dynamic and ever-changing and not the same for all. So you're coming into the vortex, into a swirl of things. But education allows you to take some control of it for yourself and to decide what parts of the world you want to accept and what parts you want to change.
How do you make meaning?
How do I personally make meaning? We make meaning in dialogue with ourselves, with others, and with the world. That there is no one meaning. And one of the great things about being a teacher and being associated with young people, but also about trying to stay alive to the world, to stay awake to the world, is that you're learning all the time. Things are changing all the time. And mostly we can talk about it in kind of superficial ways or ways that we find charming or cute. But you and I didn't know how to use pronouns properly until the last 2 years, right? And you're probably still struggling with it.
I've gotten pretty good about it. Actually.
I'm very good at it. And
ironically, because I was in the initial one, I was more. Maybe I should contextualize this since this is going to be a podcast. My firstborn identified as non-binary starting a couple of years ago, and has now they them pronouns. And when they first started doing this, I was, what is this? Inconveniencing me with these damn pronouns. Like, come on, it's like self-indulgent, narcissistic. And then there was a lot of conflict. And finally I said to them, it's like, okay. And my wife, Thea, was like, oh, you're so reactionary. Come on, get with the program. So finally I sat down with Esme and I said, okay, explain to me why this is important to you. And they did. They gave me a really coherent, and I was very proud of them, of the explanation that they gave me. And I was like, okay, that's what I needed. And the irony is now that's been a lot easier for me to accept. And for Thea, it's actually because Thea sees Esme as rejecting this femininity that she's struggled her whole life to try to empower, and that's so it's much more complicated for her than it is for me.
But isn't it? But it is complicated, and that's what's wonderful. And what I love about your conversation with your kid is that what seemed superficial and silly and okay, what's the big deal? It's a fashion, they them. But sitting down with them, you actually got a deeper understanding of what it's all about, and then your, upbringing, your lived life suddenly was in question. Why is there a binary? Why are there men and women? And why are there 2 genders or 3 or 5? Why aren't there 10,000? And why can't you be a sexual being in 10,000
It's like
ways?
Hindu gods.
Say again?
It's like Hindu gods.
Exactly. And or Hawaiian gods. That the world is so much more interesting and complicated if you simply listen to your child explain why they want to be called them, why they want to be identified as they them. And I think that's a great example of just keeping open to the idea that you don't know everything. In fact, you know very little. That's why we should be humble about what we've got and what we know.
Yeah.
Be open to learning about they, them as just a symbol of everything else you're going to learn in the next 20 years, which is going to be a lot.
Yeah.
If you're open to it.
Yeah. Who are you?
I'm Bill. I'm a 77-year-old retired professor living in Hyde Park. Just the facts.
Uh-huh. How are those facts working for you?
Pretty well. As I said around what am I think that I'm claiming your humanity sounds pretty simple, but it's actually not simple. The world is pressing down on us, asking us to be things, thingifying us. And so saying I'm a human being, that's the essence of what James Baldwin says in everything he writes. I am human. That's the essence of every slave narrative. I'm a human being. Take me as that. I've told you that I've never stopped being a kind of communist anarchist. But I wonder if anarchism also gives us the possibility of getting more in touch with who we really are, as opposed to cogs in a machine, subjects, to power. If it doesn't allow us to seek all the animal pleasures and joys, and I don't know, you're making me think a lot about how does one then get in touch with our animal selves, and I think, I do think that we're far away from that, and that hurts us. I also think that things like joy and privacy matter a lot. Privacy, is something that is disappearing in front of us, and I think that is a form of oppressing us. Mm-hmm. I think we need to have private lives, and not be constantly subjected to surveillance.
Yeah.
So I think seeing yourself living, I worry about kids who are photographed every minute of the day.
Yeah.
And photographing each other. I mean, because I'm not sure that allows for, it sticks you in an identity that you don't necessarily want to.
Well, and it's a different kind of surveillance. I think in most traditional societies, there's perpetual surveillance, but it's a small group that you're fundamentally interconnected with.
Right.
And now we live in a very different kind of surveillance society. And it's not even like there's a state that's surveilling us. There's a different kind of society we're surveilling each other constantly.
We're surveilling ourselves and each other,
yeah.
But the state, don't leave the state out, because the state is surveilling us big time. And, when WikiLeaks pointed out that, the CIA has all of our tapes of every phone conversation, it's all there. And we all kind of shrugged and said, so what? But I didn't shrug. I freaked out. Yeah, I think that's a very dangerous thing.
What are your dreams telling you?
There are two kind of dreams. I mean, one is the actual dreams that I have every night, and they tell me a lot of different things. Almost everything, every movie I see, I dream about it for a week afterwards.
Uh-huh.
And it's telling me that I'm reconstructing and rethinking the whole thing. So let me recommend Macbeth, the new Macbeth.
Oh, yeah.
Have you seen it?
No, not yet.
It's a must. I think seeing it in the theater matters because of the sets are so staggeringly beautiful. But, see Macbeth. It's a staggeringly brilliant production. But then I just last night binge watched a show from Australia called Stateless.
Uh-huh.
And it's about an immigration detention center. And it is overwhelmingly bleak and difficult.
Yeah.
And so I dreamt about that last night. So I always dream about the books I'm reading. And actually, they help me go to sleep as well. When I get into bed, I often rethink a scene of a book I just read, and that puts me to sleep, and then I dream about it.
Yeah.
So they're telling me to reconstruct and rethink the whole thing.
So do you think, how do your dreams in this regard work within meaning making for you?
One of the things my dreams have told me is that what we take to be rational and conscious and awake is only one. It's only one fragment of what's going on, because there's a whole other world. And if I were living the dreams that I have, like the dream I had last night about this detention center, I'd be locked up in a psychiatric ward, because it's crazy.
Well,
what I'm seeing is actually crazy.
Right. But, the interesting thing about that is it's all coming from within your head, too.
Absolutely.
So you are as much the dreamscape as you are the dreamer.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So dream on, dreamer.
Yeah.
Exactly. But if you listen to your dreams, what your dreams tell you is that this part of your life, these particular 12 hours or whatever, or 15 hours, are just one part of who you are, because there's a whole inner thing going on that's churning and desiring and wishing and hoping. And so that's one way of thinking about dreams. The other thing is that I am a romantic in the sense that, and an idealist in the sense that I think there are ideals worth living for. I'm not an idealist in the sense that I think that we can just wish good things into being, but I am an idealist in the sense that I have an ideal. And in that sense, my dream, I have utopian dreams. I have a belief that we could do so much better.
And
I often think of this in terms of kids in schools. I think it is not hard to do what I think about. It's not impossible. It's not a fantasy. It could be done. We won't do it. We refuse. But that's not because it's so distant. So I have utopian dreams.
What moves you?
What moves me? So many things. I mean, being alive is the most... Everything moves me. I mean, Lake Michigan moves me. Music moves me. Art, theater, reading, other people. So all that moves me. But nothing moves me quite as much as the feeling that I have when I'm part of something larger than myself, pushing against a rock, trying to make it move. And so in that sense, I guess it gets us back to politics, because it's deep in my essence that I want to be part of a collective, arm in arm, heart to heart, pushing that rock out of the way, pushing that obstacle out of the way. And the dialectic there, the problem for me always has been, how do you commit to a cause wholeheartedly and not lose your humanity? How do you do both? How do you remain fully human and at the same time part of a movement? That's complicated, and I don't think it's easily solved or even solvable.
How does it feel when you're moved?
It feels energizing. It feels like you don't want to sleep. You want to keep at it. You know, even the recent upheaval after the death of George Floyd, where I was in the streets a lot and in a lot of different places. But the feeling that we could be heard, that we could see each other, and together we could make a difference. And I just had so much energy from that. I got energy from the crowd. And the interesting thing is, you know, it was COVID, so we didn't want to be too close to people. And the good news is, because of our age, we naturally fell to the back and tried to keep up. The demonstration would be surging on Lakeshore Drive, and we'd be trying to catch up. But I think it is energizing. I think what it means to be moved is to be energized.
How do you experience those moments when you're not energized? Energized, I should say.
It really is a funny question, because I do feel energized, hopeful, on the move, in the mix most of the time. I also can be at rest, taking things in. I love movies, but I do feel energized still, sitting in the seat, eating popcorn.
Do you have moments of just sort of a more, aside, say when you're not engaged with like a film or something, where, like, say you're on Lakeshore Drive or
on my bicycle,
on your bike, and how are you experiencing that moment? Because that's presumably a different kind of.
Last fall, you know, I had to go to a doctor's appointment because of my lungs, and I rode my bike from Hyde Park to Northwestern, and I was so happy to not only feel myself breathing and coughing, but also to walk into the doctor's office having biked 8 miles, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, I do feel that is a form of meditation. That is, my mind can wander, and I don't have any set agenda. I'm just kind of moving along.
Yeah. Part of, you know, this is a question that I'm still grappling with, because the idea behind this question is most of us in most of our waking life, that we're pretty desensitized to our own energy states, which I think emotions are. They're just energy states within us, and not just. That's belittling them. They are magnificent expressions of our energy states, but that we're cut off to them. If you ask most people how you doing, there, I'm fine. And so I think what I'm trying to do with this question is to spark a conversation about how do we awaken to our own emotional processes, our own energy processes, so that we are more fully cognizant of what is framing our being.
No, but I mean, so you're saying if you're aware of your emotional states and energy, you can be more intentional.
You can be more intentional. You're more autonomous. You're not you're not dominated by something else.
Yeah, I mean, autonomous is an interesting word because we just agreed that you're never autonomous.
Autonomous in the sense of isolated, but autonomous. It's interesting. Can a collectivity be autonomous?
Well, I don't think it can be autonomous, but I think the dialectic is something between autonomous and connected, and both are happening all the time, right? Or another way of saying it is back to the dilemma I've always had as a movement person is I want to be fully committed to the movement, but I don't want to give up my ability to think for myself.
Yeah.
And I don't want anybody else to do that either. Mm-hmm. So how do you build a movement, a collective, if everybody also has the responsibility and the right to think for themselves and to act on those thoughts? I mean, difficult, but it takes work. But part of that work, I think, probably is being aware of what makes you joyful, energetic, ecstatic, and what makes you, flattened out and weakened. And so I'm not saying there are not moments when, I'll tell you a funny story. So when Bernadine went to jail, she didn't go to jail right after we turned ourselves in. She went because she refused to talk to a grand jury a year later. And the grand jury was investigating a crime that was committed in part by the two biological parents of our adopted son. Mm-hmm. It's a complicated moment for her.
Yeah.
She wouldn't talk to the grand jury. She went to jail. I had 3 little kids, a job, and I was trying to see Bernadine every day in jail. And it was a hard life for me. And I took up cocaine in a pretty big way because it was better than coffee. And my dealer was working out of a bar very nearby. And so I did a lot of cocaine in that year. But I also decided I had to go see a psychiatrist. And I had a friend who was one of the brilliant old ladies of New York psychiatry. And I made an appointment with her after her hours, and I went and spent 2 hours with her in her apartment. And she talked to me, she listened to me, and we talked for quite a while. And at the end of it, she leaned over and took my hand, and she said, "Bill, you're not depressed, you're sad. You don't need a psychiatrist. You need to get your wife out of prison." And she said, "Because you're never sad, you've mistaken sadness for depression, but it's an entirely different thing.
Yeah.
You're sad because there's something real in the world that's making you sad. It's not an internal condition.
Yeah.
Go get your wife free."
Uh-huh.
And that was good advice. And
yeah.
I never saw a psychiatrist again.
Yeah. Did that change your relationship with cocaine at that point?
No, the cocaine lasted for a year. What changed my relationship with cocaine was that when Bernadine got out of prison, I went to my dealer. Cocaine is highly addictive, and it's a amazing energizer.
Yeah.
But I went to my dealer, and he took me aside and he said, "I'm out of the business because there was a guy here. I'm pretty sure part of the Rockefeller drug law. I'm not going to jail for life, so I'm done." And I never touched it again. My dealer shut me off.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was the end of it.
Yeah.
But for a year, I was really deep into it.
And was that a difficult transition?
Well, it's like detoxifying from anything. I mean, it felt pretty low. I would have the same. I mean, I would have it on a lesser degree if I stopped drinking coffee.
Yeah.
I'd be horrible for a couple of days and get a headache. So it had that aspect. But I don't know if you ever found drugs as useful as meditation, but drugs are also a way to open a door to something else.
Sure.
Marijuana certainly for me was when I used to smoke it, and cocaine was, but LSD was in a really big way. And I only took LSD for maybe 2 or 3 years, but those trips were revelatory in a lot of ways.
Who's writing your life story?
I think that in many ways, so many people write your story. And as somebody who's been kind of caught in the certain public eye, both for good and for bad, I mean, both in my favor and out of my favor, a lot of people have a claim on who I am and defining who I am. From my own perspective, of all the things I've done in my life, raising these 3 boys was the most significant. There's nothing that compares to it. And my feelings about them, my investment in them is so total. You know, I think about being fathers, and it's different than being a mother because the mother actually, her physical body creates another physical body.
Yeah.
And their hearts are the same, and they break apart at some point. Tremendous pain and suffering in that. But it's always somehow that connection. And we have something different happening, but also very intense. And for me, that's the most intense ecstasy that I've experienced in my life. The birth of my kids and then raising my kids. The interesting thing about our family is that because our 3rd kid was adopted and was very, very troubled for a long, long time, there's something amazingly special about my feelings about him, my investment in him.
Yeah.
You know, that he because it was hard fought. It just didn't come naturally. It came with a lot of struggle. But yeah, I think your kids write your life story to some extent. I think about the poem by, her name just escaped me, but do you know the poem I Go Back to 1937?
No.
It's a marvelous poem, and it's by a woman who says, I go back to 1937. I see them standing at the college gate, his beautiful body, innocent, untouched, her beautiful body, innocent and untouched. And I see them approaching each other, and I see them holding hands. And I want to say, don't do it. You'll do terrible things. You know, and then she describes some of the terrible things. You'll hurt children. And then she says, but I want to be born. So I take their hips and clash them together like paper dolls, and then I'll write about it.
Yeah.
You know, so in a sense, she's saying, I'll write my parents' story. In a sense, all kids do.
Yeah.
And for you and me, for teachers, besides kind of in the public world where you publish and there are people who talk back to you in that regard, but your students will write your story, and they'll write it in a lot of different ways, right? Because some of them will become teachers and or parents and or, you know, mentors, and they'll be reflecting on you.
We were talking about meaning making, and I think the probably most profound way we make meaning is by writing a story, by understanding things as a story. Do you own your shit, or does your shit own you?
You know, I guess I would say that, you know, both and. I mean, I think that, and I think it's true for most of us, that as soon as you're aware of your shit, you can deal with it, but you're not always aware of it. And that's what we were talking about before, about things like white skin privilege. I mean, saying that somebody has a white blind spot, it's in the nature of it that it's a blind spot, and therefore it owns you, right? So do I have blind spots? Absolutely, that own me for certain. As soon as I can identify them, then I can own them. But
How do you identify them?
well, I think that one of the ways you identify them, a great example from our conversation, is your child saying to you, let me explain to you, they, them. It was dominating you until you became aware of it. And you became aware of it because your child said, become aware of it. And or forced you to become aware. You invited them to explain it. But
so who forces you to be aware of your shit?
I think all the time, students, your own children, your grandchildren.
Yeah.
You know, I think that they're a wonder at being able to call people on their shit. I mean, one of the great things about adolescence, and one of the reasons that adolescence in our culture is so troubling to people, is because adolescents have a built-in hypocrisy meter, and they know that you're saying one thing and doing another thing.
Yeah.
And because they know it, we resent them, because they call us on it often enough, and when they don't call us on it, we suspect they know us anyway.
Yeah. So let me ask you a question, because one thing that really strikes me about you is that you are actually very open. It seems like you've been very open to this adolescent voice, which is unusual, because I think the natural tendency for people is as you get older, you get settled in a certain way. So how do you How do you exist in a space where you're willing to be open to an adolescent challenge that you don't react to?
Well, I think that I said earlier, and I think it's true of both of us, that one of the reasons I choose teaching is because it puts me in relationship with kids, with young people. And that is a healthy place to be, because you see a world that's coming, and it's not the fixed world that you are settled into. So I think being around kids is a lot of it. And this is very intentional with me.
How do you find love?
Wow.
Or how do you find love?
How do I find love?
Yeah. How do you find love?
Yeah. I mean, I think that love is the most fundamental life energy that we have. And I think you find it by relating to a lot of people and interacting with them and listening and watching and trying to be open to love. What I look for in relationships is the ability to kind of grow together, our roots. And Bernadine and I have that, but I think I also have it with my kids and with my daughters-in-law. And you have enough experiences and enough challenges and enough resolutions that's the essence of what love is. Commitment. So where do I look for it? Everywhere.
Uh-huh.
Everywhere.
Where do you find it?
Where do I find it? I find it everywhere.
Yeah.
I find it also in teaching. It's really a marvelous thing. And when you're a teacher and you fall in love with your students and your students fall in love with you.
Where are you going from here?
From here, I'm going to dinner. One of the things that I think is in the nature of life, certainly in the nature of my life, is that I always have things to do. And, my mentor, Maxine Green, she always said, I am what I am not yet. And that was kind of her slogan, which one of my students tattooed on her wrist. I am what I am not yet. And that is a statement of futuring, a statement of where do I want to go? And I often think that that's how I have lived and how I want to live. I have things to do. Where am I going from here? I've got a couple more books I have to write this year. Uh-huh. One book I'm writing is called Notes Toward an Obituary. Uh-huh. And one book I'm writing is called When Freedom is the Question, Abolition is the Answer. That's based on my podcast and a lot of interviews I've done. Wanting to take care of the people around me who are aging, my age, mm-hmm. who are suffering. That's why whenever we get together with old people, we always have what we call the organ recital, where we describe what broke down, what was replaced, what fell apart.
Yeah.
I don't know, all those thoughts come to my mind when you say, where are you going? Mm-hmm. Straight to hell.
So, Eric, what did you learn from your conversation with Bill today?
My takeaway on this is actually kind of interesting. It's about persona. For all of Bill's wisdom and for all of Bill's humanity, there's still this persona that he inhabits. And our personas can be really powerful for us, but they can also be limiting. I think Bill's persona is empowering in that it's helped him withstand an unimaginable amount of public scorn. He's even gotten death threats. And so when we have a persona like that, it can be something that can really shield us, it can empower us, but at the same time, we can get stuck by it. And one of the things I would notice in our conversations is it was hard to get Bill to pull off of his persona. This is the downside of having a public persona is when mm-hmm. you are so public.
You're always on.
You're always mm-hmm. on, and then you have to be, and when you're attacked so much,
of course,
can't really share those types of vulnerabilities.
Yeah, because then you become an easier target.
And that's not to critique him so much as to say that's something I think we all do. We all have ego issues. We all have ideas about ourselves and that we want to defend. And they can be really empowering for us, but sometimes they can also get in our way.
That's something that I've never really thought about. Well, that's not true. I have thought about that. How much my youthfulness is affected by the fact that I look youthful.
Yeah, and you end up playing up, and
like just involuntarily,
delightful, sunny, and
yeah. But I genuinely am like a sunny person.
Right.
I take a lot after my mom, who's like a ray of fucking sunshine. Like, it's annoying.
Let me get that on a t-shirt.